Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you. I'm Bhavna Kakar. I'm the editor of Take on Art magazine and the founder director for Latitude 28. I'm just going to read a little welcome note for everybody. It is a true privilege to open this gathering, Indigenous, Resistant Epistemologies and the Normative Frame of the Contemporary here at Arthashila, Delhi. As the editor of Take on Art and as someone who has long been invested in sustaining critical conversations in the arts, it gives me immense joy to see so many artists, scholars, curators, poets, friends, some collectors and allies gathered here to hold space for Indigenous voices. This year marks a milestone for the magazine Take on Art. It's our 15th year and Take Indigenous is our 32nd issue. And it's been an immense joy and pride to build one of South Asia's leading journals for contemporary art. Over this journey, we have sought to generate critical discourse, champion emerging voices, and reimagine the cultural landscape of our time. At its heart, Take has always strived to be more than a magazine, a living archive and a catalyst for dialogue across geographies and generations. The Take on Writing series, of which the symposium is a part, grew from this commitment, an attempt to address the relative scarcity of platforms for art criticism in our region, especially in our region, and to cultivate a community of writers, critics, peers, practitioners in dialogue with one another. It feels especially meaningful then that today we open this symposium. Indigenous here is not simply a label. It is a set of living, evolving worldviews and practices that challenge us to rebuild with care, reciprocity, and a responsibility to shift from token inclusion to structural change. This symposium is an extension of our Spring 2025 issue, Take Indigenous, which was guest edited by Katya García-Antón, that sought to weave geographies, timelines, and worldviews across the global Indigenous family. Today, through the convening of bodies, minds, and spirits, we take this journey further to center ancestrality, to confront colonial histories, to rethink the structures of the contemporary art world that too often flatten complexity under the guise of inclusivity. Our aim over the next 2 days is not to be comprehensive or universalist, but to build alliances between Adivasi, Aboriginal, First Nations, and other Indigenous communities, and with non-Indigenous allies who stand in solidarity, with people like us. Together, we will explore how knowledge systems rooted in kinship between humans, ancestors, land, and more than human beings can transform the way we think, do, and create. It feels especially meaningful to open the symposium Indigenous, Resistant Epistemologies and the Normative Frame of the Contemporary. My deepest gratitude to Katya for providing the intellectual framework for the symposium, to our distinguished speakers and panelists for traveling from all over the world to share their perspective, to Sanjeevji and Setika from Takshila for being such generous partners, to my teams at Take on Art and Latitude 28, Dilpreet, Tanya, Andre, Shreyasi, Sania, Sanchita, whose labor has made this gathering possible today. And above all, and this is personal, to my husband and my father, without whose strength and support, especially in a year that has tested our family really deeply, I could not have been here without them. And thank you for the audience for taking your time to be here today. Let us use these 2 days to practice attentive listening, critical reflection, and open exchange, and maybe leave with commitments, however modest, that help us work with greater accountability and reciprocity. Thank you for being here, and I now invite Katya to share the conceptual ground for our conversations for the next 2 days. Thank you, everybody.
Seva Yohar, Dandalu, Ya Yaganata, Namaskar Juju, Namaskar Namaste. Our warmest greetings to you all. in some of the many mother tongues represented here today. In this gathering, we honor the vast diversity of languages, lands, and lineages that have brought us together. The participants in this symposium, its conveners, and myself bid you all a most warm welcome. And let me continue by offering also our heartfelt gratitude to the site in which we are now, to the lands, waters, fauna, flora, and more than human beings that host us here, to the ancestors of these lands, to the Adivasi peoples, to indigenous artists and thinkers in this symposium, to all speakers in this symposium, and to all of you who have shaped this moment with your knowledges and your ways of being. A gathering of this size and scope is the fruit of collective effort. And so our sincere thanks therefore have to go to all of those on the stage and behind the scenes, to every speaker and participant, organizer and supporter, to all of you in the audience, and to Art Sheila for so generously hosting us here today. And a heartfelt thank you also to the convener of the symposium, to Bhavna, for inviting me so generously to conceptualize this symposium, for all the hard work that's gone into making it happen, and also to your wonderful team, Bhavna, all of you in Take on Art and Latitude 28, whose hard work has made this day a beautiful reality. This symposium addresses the intersection of various timelines, ancestrality, coloniality, and the contemporary. And these are not separate notions, but interwoven temporalities that will shape the multiple reflections of the next 2 days. Ancestrality refers to the deep-rooted connection to ancestors, lands, cosmologies, and traditional knowledge systems. Ancestrality speaks to indigenous worldviews that emphasize a continuity with the past, relationships with non-human entities, and the sacredness of place and of kin. Ancestrality centers indigenous ways of knowing, the values and practices that predate colonization. It emphasizes a non-linear conception of time, where the past is always present and guiding the future. Ancestrality reinforces identity through stories, rituals, languages, and land-based knowledges passed through generations. Coloniality refers to the ongoing structures and logics of colonial power that persist even after the formal end of colonial administrations. Coloniality focuses on the dispossession, assimilation, and marginalization of indigenous peoples through colonialism, highlights how colonial systems continue to shape education, governance, the legal systems, health systems, spiritual spaces, and identity, and of course also shapes the art world. Coloniality reveals how indigenous peoples are often forced to navigate or resist systems that erase their histories and their rights. The contemporary refers to the present moment, but not just as a neutral now. The contemporary involves how indigenous peoples are actively living, creating, and resisting today against the normativity of the contemporary art world, while drawing from ancestrality and confronting coloniality. So, with these notions in mind, some of the many questions that we will be asking and reflecting upon today might include: how do sovereign indigenous ways of being and knowing persist, transform, and resist within the normative structures of the contemporary art world? What does it mean to think with and from indigenous perspectives rather than merely about them? And how do we honor the specificity of indigenous sovereign thinking and its diversity while still building planetary solidarity? Allow me to share with you the reflections of the esteemed Aboriginal Goinpool scholar, Eileen Moreton Robinson. Her words articulate the crucial distinction between Western and indigenous notions of sovereignty, and I found them very eloquent and useful in these symposiums and discussions. They read so: our sovereignty is embodied, ontological, and epistemological, and is grounded in complex relations derived from the intersubstantiation of ancestral beings, humans, and the land. It differs from Western constructions of sovereignty, which are based on the social contract, territorial integrity, and individual rights. This quote comes from her book, Sovereign Subjects, Indigenous Sovereignty Matters of 2007. And in this quote, the concept of intersubstantiation is important, and it's raised as one of kinship and of co-being, of indivisibility between land, people, ancestors, and other than human entities. It is at the heart of indigenous thought, and it is a central thread in this symposium. The worldview of indivisibility between land and people challenges the many hegemonic systems that underline modernity and coloniality, and that operate our contemporary experience and the contemporary art world. This indivisibility means that in many indigenous worldviews, there was and is no word for art in the Western sense. Aesthetic creation not as a separate domain, but rather, in indigenous worldviews, woven into life and land, ritual and spirit. To give you an example that I'm well acquainted with, having lived and worked for over 10 years in the Nordic region and in close collaboration with its Arctic indigenous people, the Sami people. The Sami, for example, had to invent a word for art. They invented the word daida in the 1970s in order for their material practices to be seen by the Nordic apparatus, in order for them to be able to participate in the Nordic art institutions. But this creation of this word, this term, daida, generated a deep epistemological loss because it isolated something else, something called dwoji. And dwoji is an ancestral Sami notion. It's a meta-philosophy that exceeds the capacity of Western epistemology to apprehend it. Dwoji combines the environment, aesthetics, spirituality, making, and knowledge. To make matters worse, in the Nordic case, with the invention of daida, the Nordics then translated dwoji, mistranslated dwoji, undermined dwoji as mere craft, divorcing it from all the other constituent elements. So given this history, the Sami youth of today are reinvigorating dwoji, its place, its ways, setting spaces of empowerment for both dwoji and for daida on Sami premises. So I mention this because I wonder if such mistranslations, if such efforts of correction have been and might still be experienced by different Adivasi communities today. The point being that translation is not neutral, and that art world institutions, exhibitions, and museums often enforce legibility on indigenous practices, framing them in extraneous ways. So whilst acknowledging that this symposium is embedded in these pitfalls of languages, of translations, and of framings, the same that underpin the contemporary art world, the symposium also aims to dig into them, to dig into some of these pitfalls of translation. Despite these challenges, the art world today is also proving to be a space with potential, in which many indigenous communities are generating visibility and agency and reaching broader society with power. With a power that many have found almost impossible to achieve in other structures, such as those of the law in the tribunals and courts, such as those of medicine or education, politics or economy. Which is why we are hopeful that a symposium such as this facilitates reflection, criticality, and knowledge building. Let us now turn for a moment to this term, indigenous, as we will be using it a lot in the symposium. Following the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007, to which India was an enthusiastic signatory, Indigenous with the capital I has become worldwide a legal, political, and culturally useful and used term. However, it is by no means used globally. And as politics shift in various countries, it is a term that can be co-opted by governmental policies, bringing its own challenges. In addition, the term indigenous risks homogenizing distinct life worlds from the thousands of different communities and nations that constitute the more than 500 million indigenous peoples in the world. However, this term does provide a platform for the shared experience and worldviews of indigenous peoples across the planet. A platform that becomes useful when operating in the art world and when being outside of those indigenous communities, when those indigenous peoples travel outside of their communities and need to relate and communicate with others. So this conference approaches this term indigenous not as a fixed category, but as a complex space for discussion, with potential to advocate for epistemological resistance and for solidarity. This symposium is not an event to observe from a distance. It is a call to listen deeply, to speak respectfully, to embrace complexity, to acknowledge discomfort, to work through challenges and errors, to co-create across difference. As a friend, Skoltesami land guardian and artist Paulina Fyodorov, who lives now in Helsinki, but her lands are spread between Finland and Russia, once told me, "We have not yet greeted each other." It was a very powerful thing to say. After hundreds of years, we have not yet greeted each other. Indigenous peoples and other peoples in the world are yet to properly greet each other. So we hope this gathering can be a space where, overcoming shortfalls, we can deepen our knowledge so that those greetings, full, complicated, transformative, can grow. What lies ahead over the next 2 days? You'll be hearing from artists and scholars, curators and knowledge keepers across 8 rich sessions, from artistic practices that uphold indigenous worldviews to museologies of transformation, from poetic practices of resistance to the potential for collectors to shape art world economies and institutions in ways that are important for Indigenous peoples. In our first session, titled Collaborative Practices of Epistemological Equity, we are honored by Worli artist Rajesh Vangad and artist Gauri Gill in a discussion with curator Pooja Vaish to reflect upon their groundbreaking collaboration of 12 years. This will be followed by a lunch break. In session 2, titled Centering Kinships, Poetic and Embodied Knowledges in Contemporary Life, Langia Saura, artist and knowledge keeper, elder and leader Srinivas Gamango, will be in discussion with choreographer and dancer Dipti Yepatra, and with some introductory comments online preceding the discussion by artist and scholar Brian Martin, Bunjalung Kamila Roy Muruwari, coming in from Australia digitally. They will discuss their project Aratulu, Tree, which is a collaboration between Aboriginal and Adivasi artists of Southeast Australia and Odisha on the significance of trees for their worldviews. This will be followed by the words of poet Udayan Vaipei, who pays attention in his discussion to the role of Adivasi poetry as a space for connection and transformation. And this session will be moderated by Chaitanya Sambrani. Session 3, titled The Power of Indigenous Cosmopolitanisms, Polyphonic Encounters and Solidarities, brings us art historian and curator Chaitanya Sambrani with a presentation that will highlight the power of inherent cosmopolitanism in Adivasi, indigenous, and ancestral practices. This will be followed by a presentation by writer and critic Kamayami Sharma, who will be reflecting upon the practice and legacy of the life of the legendary artist Yangar Singh Shyam from the Gond Parta community in the decolonization of South Asian visual arts. And this legacy will be discussed further with his nephew, who's here today earlier, Gond artist Venkat Raman Singh Shyam, through his own work. And after that, we are graced with the presence of Mithila artist Santosh Kaidas, who will be in dialogue with the curator Khushbu Jain to address Kaidas's artistic practice and the solidarity expressed by many Adivasi artists in the context of emerging issues affecting broad society. And all of these will be given a response by curator and writer Lina Vincent, followed by a Q&A. And we will end the day with session 4, titled Time and Space in the Epistemic Resistance of Indigenous Worldviews, with the author and scholar, beloved I think by all in this room, Professor Ganesh Narayan Das Devi, who will explore the distinctive ways in which Indigenous communities across the globe conceptualize time and space, and how these constructions form the foundation of their worldviews. So with such inspiring speakers today, we invite you all to participate fully. Let us celebrate together not just the strong presence of Indigenous peers in the art world, the cultural field, and in society, but their wisdom and role in shaping our shared planetary futures. And as we prepare to start the day, I'd like to leave you with the incisive and evocative words of Grace Kujur, an Adivasi poet from the Orang community in Jharkhand. Her poetry speaks of struggle, of quiet strength, and of a deep ancestral rootedness that persists even as the world shifts around it. The poem is titled Waiting. It's been translated from Hindi from the collection Ek Aur Yani Shikar of 2020. And it resonates strongly with the themes of the symposium, the continuity of land and knowledge, the silences we inherit, and the steadfast presence of Indigenous beings within contemporary complexities. And it reads so. Why are you silent, my friend? Say something at least. Even with fire hidden deep in the heart of coal beneath our feet, why is your body so cold? In the vast tracts of Yarkand, copper wire crawl. Don't the waters of this iron-rich land flow through your veins too? Yet, even after drinking them, you are blown away by a mere gust of wind to Assam, Botang, the brick kilns and the bustling cities. Under the milky glow of thermal power and the magical lamps of Yadugoda, with only a Karanj oil wick lamp in hand, in what darkness of the mind do you wander, my friend? Without water, forest, or land, the grammar of life in the Salwood forests, into whose hands what scholars have you mortgaged it, my friend? Even the parrots, emerging from the tree hollows, ask for the address of their own existence, still waiting for your reply. My friend, I still stand, like the lone sal tree, rooted in stone, quietly drawing my share of water. Thank you, and I wish you a very enjoyable day.